a young engineer named Teresa stood outside my office one day. I could see she's lurking out there, right? Teresa, come on in. And a senior engineer, Alan, was with her. And they said, they were like really, really hesitant. And I said, well, what's on your mind? And they said, well, we've got this idea we want to discuss with you, but we don't think it's going to go anywhere. I said, why not? I mean, we have a great debate. And then Alan, he didn't want to speak. But Teresa, she's originally from Hong Kong, blunt, right? She said, oh, I haven't been here as long as everyone else, but they all say that your office is open, but they lose every argument. It was the most biting, painful moment as an alleged leader.
Yeah.
I emphasize that term.
Oh, I've been there.
I never had. And I stewed on that for weeks. The company performed much better, not the next day or anything, as I adapted and started to internalize that. But the notion that they didn't think they were really being heard, they were just entering into a debate that they were going to lose, that's not the culture you want.
Welcome to the How to Not Execute Your Strategy podcast. I'm your host, Tim Ojai. This podcast is dedicated to the biggest lessons learned from the people who own strategic execution, the senior leaders who live in the center of it. My guest today is Craig Humphreys, a former CTO who now consults and partners with a wide variety of companies to maximize the use of their data. See the show notes for more information about Craig and to also get access to the leader guide for this episode. Let's get to it. All right, Craig, I am super excited to be interviewing today because two things. One, you're probably the most interesting man in the world that I know personally, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And then secondly, because you have a richness, a depth of knowledge around how execution goes really well and how execution goes really poorly. And I have a feeling you're going to have a lot to share. Thank you for joining. Let me give the audience a quick summary. I've given them a full bio, but Craig, like some of the most interesting man in the world commentary, you've got a 3rd degree black belt in each Taekwondo, Hapkido, and Eskrima. You've been an analyst for the CIA and even got a presidential citation for that work. You were in the early days of Pixar with Steve Jobs. You helped build the architecture for Facebook to transform it from this college thing to this worldwide entity that we know and arguably love. You worked at SETI. You were with Michio Kaku and looking for aliens, Hollywood special effects, and then of course all the data security things and helping with wireless security for the Super Bowl, helping with the firewall. What is it? The Great Firewall in China, the actual national firewall of China. You've just done so much. Yeah. And CTO and business investor, and you're still very active in a lot of different startups and more or less trying to get them going so they can be profitable and then hopefully create a solid exit strategy. So welcome to the show. It's a delight to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Craig, what has been I'm not even going to go into the first two questions yet. I just want to ask, what has been probably the most common pattern you've seen in all those experiences when it comes to great leaders who are what you would consider genuinely strategic thinkers?
Yeah, strategic thinking and then good outcomes from strategy are a bit different, right? You do find a greater number of leaders who have great strategic thoughts and ideas. They don't necessarily all get there. Well, as a matter of fact, a lot of them don't get there. That may be one of our topics that we're going to cover mostly today, but I think it is the ability to not get lost in the weeds, right? Because especially with entrepreneurs that I've counseled and advised and mentored, you find them looking at everything that could happen or might happen, and this panic sets in a way. It's like a noise, a buzzing in their brains, if you will, and they're not able to think clearly about some very fundamental and perhaps even simple things. Right? Was it Henry Ford or somebody who said, nothing happens till you sell something? And yet you'll find entrepreneurs, I've got to do this, I've got to get this, I've got to get lawyers, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to have social media, I've got to market. All these gotta. Maybe you just want to find a customer, right?
Man, we could totally go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to keep us moving, but I want to come back to the qualities of those leaders in a moment. Let's go back to your comment around, there's a difference between strategic thinking and then the theme of this podcast, strategic execution. Take us to a time where you had a strategy that did not go as planned, and what did you learn from it?
Sure. In the early days when I was doing work in national intelligence, I had a team, and the strategy, I'm going to call it my simple-minded strategy. Some of my better ideas were undeveloped, at least by me at that time. And our focus was better technology, better value. We were going to outperform anybody else. That was our strategy. That was my strategy. The strategic execution dictates that your strategy has to be well understood and supported. It wasn't. It was understood to the extent that each of my engineers, who were recruited very carefully, very talented guys and gals, I recruited according to my strategy, best, brightest, that could do these things, that could accomplish these technically challenging goals. If I read you my strategy, just that, and what I did, it'll sound smart. And it was so incomplete. What was wrong was I did not carefully make sure that there was consistency in the messaging and everyone had the same vision or interpretation of what that strategy was. But that was a small weakness compared to, I didn't view my role as supporting the people. I viewed my role as getting to our goals. The old MBWO, right? Management by walking about, MBO, management by objective.
Yeah.
It's not a good model. It's not long-term sustainable. It's like the Hawthorne principle. Works for a little bit and then crumbles. It's because if you don't exist to achieve success in the people that report to you, you're going to fail somewhere or the other.
Wow. Okay. So let's just pause right there. You've laid out a couple of really big rocks that I want to call out. First, clarity is not just about, it's clear in your mind, it's clear in the understanding and the actions as a result of the people that you're working with. If you're going to execute, it's not just people can say what you said, it's actually they do what you intended them to do. They're able to take the objective we're going after, and the decisions I make will lead me into pursuing that outcome. And I don't need you hovering over my shoulder, yelling and or whispering to make sure I'm doing the right things. And then secondly, there's this element of your goal. If you do that first part really well, you make it really super clear what the outcome is, then your job is to back off of the outcome and then rotate into helping them achieve that outcome. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. But there's one more factor that we don't want to miss here. Implied but not stated in what you just commented is that it sounds like a leader dictating strategy. And I was somewhat doing that. That is the poor version of strategy. That's the B- way to do things. In all my problem solving since then, I've discovered, as we both know, you get some of the best strategic ideas from people who are in the line of fire and know what's going on. You develop the best strategy that you're going to execute by getting as much input as you can from your team.
Let's crack that open a little bit because, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I think what leaders do is special. It's not what everybody else is doing. There needs to be a certain level of decision-making authority or even the veto authority, like, nah, we're not going to do this. But I think the leader needs to be critically clear on why. And the collaboration then comes into the what. What are we actually going to do? If this is why we need to do something, it may be, here's a problem we need to solve. It may be, here's the new goal we need to achieve. Here's why that's important. What we do becomes the space for collaboration. Then how, I just let people, you figure it out. Let me know how I can empower you to do that and bring to me a couple of different paths and we'll figure that out. But does that jive with what you're saying, or am I off on the wrong?
Yeah, it jives. I personally think that the determination of that vision, the inputs to that, should come from everywhere. The decision-making exists in the leader. The communication of that is the leader's responsibility. Literally your job. And then, as you indicated, and I totally agree, if you want to execute that well, you better be supporting and training and developing everybody in that team. You have to define their success as your own. But You don't get the best strategy typically in an ivory tower thinking sort of way.
Yeah, sure. So let's go back and give us the rest of the story
Yeah,
around what you did and what you got as a result.
there was a point where there was a transition in the way technology was being used in national intelligence. It had been large central computers that we used. We were transitioning to workstation independent computing that we all know today, right? And most of the ideas for that transition were horrifyingly expensive and inefficient. We developed ideas that were based on modern standards, looking at the trajectory of what is to come. Let's get on that path and let's get off this one that's dying or dead. Solid ideas. We even produced great samples and prototypes. The vision of what we wanted to accomplish wasn't clear enough, maybe it wasn't supported well enough by me, that our customers understood it. And what ultimately occurred is the solutions and ideas that we had proposed showed up organically elsewhere 2 or 3 or 4 years later by people who did communicate it well, and they ended up with most of that business and opportunity.
Wow.
And it's a case of, per your podcast title, a very good strategy, not well executed.
So what were the key things that you learned then from that experience? If you were to pick, let's just say 2 big lessons, you kind of shared one already. If you don't take the focus of your energy as a leader and put it into your people and make it just about the outcome, you're already off on the wrong path. Let's just say that's one we've talked about. But
Sure.
if you're going to now add 2, let's call either complementary or supplementary concepts, what would you add?
Given that we had really good ideas, and that was generally understood in the organization, I should have early on brought as many people together as possible and brainstormed within my organization, how are we going to get the customers and users to adopt this? What are your thoughts? Ben, Leslie, Gloria, and Barry, people I knew from back then, and I didn't do that as well as we might have. I think had that been done, those ideas been collected and widely understood, our traction and adoption would have been better. It only took a little bit. Once that technology started to get used, it spread like wildfire because it was 1/10 the cost and twice the performance. It was a no-brainer.
Yeah. So if you were to break down the percentage of responsibility of why that did not happen, was it 100% on you? Was it 90% on you, 10% on them? Because I've had other guests on this podcast. They talk about one of the most critical aspects that every team needs is courage. You need to have the strength and conviction and confidence that you can speak your mind to your leader and say, I disagree. And you also have to be the leader who invites that. So what is the percentage split between you creating that problem and you talked about earlier about training and development and having people having that ability to speak? That's a tough one, right?
Hard to assign a percentage, but it's mostly me. And let me tell you a story as to why. They may have had ideas, and I, open door policy, come in anytime. I mechanically was doing everything right. Spiritually, not so much. And here's the little story. A young engineer named Teresa stood outside my office one day. I could see she's lurking out there, right? Teresa, come in. And a senior engineer, Alan, was with her. And they said, they were like really, really hesitant. And I said, well, what's on your mind? And they said, well, we've got this idea we want to discuss with you, but we don't think it's going to go anywhere. I said, why not? I mean, we have a great debate. And then Alan, he didn't want to speak. But Teresa, she's originally from Hong Kong, blunt, right? She said, oh, I haven't been here as long as everyone else, but they all say that your office is open, but they lose every argument. It was the most biting, painful moment as an alleged leader.
Yeah.
I emphasize that term.
Oh, I've been there.
I'd ever had. And I stewed on that for weeks. The company performed much better, not the next day or anything, as I adapted and started to internalize that. But the notion that they didn't think they were really being heard, they were just entering into a debate that they were going to lose, that's not the culture you want.
Wow, that's so good.
So it's mostly me.
Hey, if you're enjoying this conversation, I want to encourage you to go to timohai.com/blog now and get the leader guide. It's an awesome way to allow me to both coach you personally through deeper reflection and to also open up the dialogue with your team. All right, back to the interview. Yeah, that's really good. So let's go from that and talk. Second official question is, what are 2 to 3 attributes that everybody in the organization needs to have in order to be great at executing? But let's start with the leader themselves. You've rattled off, you've got to be really good at clarity. You've got to be really good at humility. You've got to be really good at collaboration. What are some of the other qualities that you would rattle off that leaders need to start with in order to create an atmosphere where other attributes can rise to the surface?
You got almost all of them. I think the only critical one you missed is you have to define yourself as the least important person. You're there to support them. And the upside down triangle model, right? The leader is at the bottom trying to make everybody else above them successful. And if you're doing the other things you mentioned, if you're clear and you're listening, then you'll do a great job on that.
That's beautiful.
If you say, I'm a good supporter, but I don't listen to anybody, well, that's an empty vessel, right?
That's beautiful. That's really good, Craig. Okay, let's expand now to the larger organization. And just for the record, folks, Craig has worked literally around the world with all kinds of cultures, all kinds of generations and professions and all kinds of different things, from, like we said, tech to government to even retail. When you look across all those industries, all those cultures and geographies, et cetera, what are the attributes that stand out to you that every person in the organization has that makes that whole team, that whole organization really good at executing?
I think people come in a wide variety of skill sets and value that they bring to a company. There's introverts that just kind of want to sit in the corner, but they're contributing a lot. There's people who are bodaciously out there, but as long as they're in the right role, they're super successful. So you get personality types that are wildly different in any organization of size. I think if the roles and goals are clear and people are valued, and not just they're being told they're valued, but they feel it, and the mission is clear, that is a high-performing organization. Some of the best, very quick story, when I was at Cisco Systems doing their early firmware and business projects for what made all their devices come up. It's called board support packages. We executed a project, myself and several other Cisco employees. It was the best one that had ever happened in the company, according to John Chambers. I'm assuming John wouldn't mislead me on that fact. And it had some interesting attributes. One, through a series of personnel changes that I didn't really notice at the time, I was the only man in the group. Second thing is nobody showed up before 8 o'clock and nobody worked after 5, which is Silicon Valley weird.
Yeah, big time.
And we were ahead of schedule, under budget, and over spec. So, of course, Chambers wanted to know what's going on here. And I said, look at the group. And he says, what, I should fire all the men in the company? No, that's not what you're looking at. It's what you're seeing, but it's not what you're looking at. What you're looking at is collaboration. The unique attribute of that group is they were relatively selfless. So when somebody hit a problem, everyone else, well, not everyone, the people that could contribute stopped. Problem got knocked out, they went back to work. And I don't know if you're aware, in tech, the cost of solving a problem as each stage of the project goes up like an order of magnitude, right?
Right.
They were knocking these things out early on, all the time, over and over. They went home at 5. Parking lot was empty at 5:15. A typical manager probably would have viewed this as a poor performing organization that wasn't committed to Cisco. And yet it was the number one.
But there's, quote, low priority efforts that a different leader would have said, no, just move that to the side. We'll address it later. And you gave people the autonomy and the freedom to make the decision they felt was necessary that day, so that you didn't have to spend time at the end of the project to go fix it all. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, it is. And it exists in the lens or the channel of, in this case, the woman's name was Maria, who was the PM. She knew what the goal was. She was clear as a bell. So
Yeah.
she could make those judgments. So if you came to her and says the XYZ isn't working, well, that's not part of the plan, don't care. So that wasn't a problem,
Ah, got it.
right?
Got it.
So when you're clear and you're collaborative, amazing things happen.
Got it. And then, of course, the attitude the team brought, what made them selfless? Did you just recruit selfless people? Did they
Oh, I
become
don't get
selfless
credit for
over
that.
time? Or how did that
Those
happen?
were just changes that happened while I was there. We actually had a super talented guy, Max, who got moved out. We were upset about that. It turned out for the good because Max was so busy. And then a couple other people who I will not name, and that we were happy that they left.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
were placements, just there was some shifts, and all of a sudden, I remember walking and looking and saying, "Oh, I'm the only guy here." Huh. And it just happened. Nobody noticed.
Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't that. It was the collaboration.
But the idea, though, of the selflessness that fueled the collaboration, because I operate with the mindset that says I can create collaboration if I can get everybody to focus on delivering the same outcome. If they're sharing that outcome, they'll help even after, quote, they've gotten theirs. If we share a problem, we'll work together, we'll cooperate as long as we have that problem. But once that problem disappears, I disappear.
Yeah.
And then the worst situation is when we're sharing the same resources to solve different problems, to achieve different outcomes, and you have competition at best, open warfare between functions and roles, more commonly. So when you have selflessness, you were doing things you may not have intentionally thought of, but you were giving everybody the same outcome, and you were letting them figure out the problems that were defined as problems only under the umbrella of that outcome. And if it was outside of that umbrella, it was not a problem. And he said, don't worry about it, just keep moving. But that's empowering. That's super empowering for an employee.
I think in this case, it was leadership by example. Maria definitely gets a big chunk of this credit because if something happened, she helped. They're observing, oh, this is what we do. When I arrived, my job was to get the whole thing done as the consultant, the wizard, right? So I helped anybody who needed it. So I believe what ultimately people saw is that they're helping, I'll help.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
of course, I believe the quality of the people, they were all high quality people. And they were all just really good people.
Yeah. But now we're back to that opening point of your job is not to achieve the outcome. Your job is to help your people. So you literally built into your time and your use of time helping others. It doesn't matter what role they had or whatever.
To, right.
You just, but that was how it was operating. It wasn't like, bring me your weekly report or your daily report and we'll go review it and I'll tell you what to go do from it behind a desk.
Yeah, we were not too strong on people in that group. We got a little dinged on that one, but not very much. When Chambers came to visit, the upper manager who had several groups under him, all of a sudden he became really quiet because we were solving the actual problems. Not discussing how to document them and check boxes.
That's phenomenal. Okay, I'd be absolutely remiss if I have you as a guest and we don't talk about one of my absolute most favorite in the universe topics for strategic execution, and that's 5, 6, 7 thinking. It's between you and Lynn Bertain, but that's it. Nobody knows it more than you two. Craig, give us a very quick breakdown of what 5, 6, 7 thinking is, and then we'll talk about why it's so important.
Sure. The core principle is that there exists for any problem or project you're going to work on, you can get about 2/3, hence 67%, of all the available benefit with 5% of your available resources defined as time, people, and money. When you first tell someone that, they say, wait a minute, I can just do that 1.5 times, 7.5%, project's done. It's not exactly what I said. I said, that is there. You may or may not find it. But if you adopt the mindset that it exists, and when you and I did a little work at a large retail institution, and when I presented this to the executives in that training, they tended to be skeptical. When you asked them, hey, when you finished a project, how many times did you go, if we'd only taken that approach? Or you observed the 5%, 67% benefit at some point, but you didn't look for it necessarily at the beginning. Looking for it doesn't guarantee you're going to find it, that it does give you a much higher likelihood of a far more efficient approach. Another core principle of 567 is the problem is really big. Don't try to solve it all at once. Make progress, iterate, take the knowledge and intelligence, what you've learned, and apply it to the next phase. So stitching your way through complex problems is a win. Jumping from the beginning to the end, well, that's what government does, and it usually fails.
So how long is each cycle?
It depends on the project. Some activities like software are very amenable to that. Some projects like trying to make a difference in, say, homelessness or drug use in a society, those are going to be much longer phases because it takes more time for you to develop the understanding of root causes, what's occurring, what actually works, what doesn't, and adjusting what you're learning and applying it to get better and better results. The core principle of the phase is that don't overconsume your resources when you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
That might be the summary statement.
And then you get into the opposite of 567, which is 95-33. I take my resources and I take 95% of what I have available and I shove it onto stuff that at best, if I'm lucky, I'll get a third of the way by the time I'm done. And I'm using an American football analogy, that's punting territory. That's just 3 downs and punt, 3 downs and punt, which a lot of strategies and projects suck into that reality.
And you can end up with not a 33%, but you can end up in a football analogy with losses on your play and you're back 25 yards.
Yeah.
So it can go wrong. And we're seeing that in some companies today.
Well, it's been a joy to have you on the show. And I thank you so much, not only for being a guest, but also being a friend and teaching me. You've taught me a lot about how to execute and more specifically, how to not execute with the wisdom that you've collected over the years. And I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that episode and have some solid takeaways. Here are 3 that I want to highlight. 1, once you make the desired outcome clear, back off and take the role of supporting your team to achieve that outcome. Get them what they need, and most importantly, adopt the mindset that you are the least important person. You are not dictating, you are serving. 2, as a leader, you are responsible for creating an environment where people can influence you and change the way you think. It's not about winning the debate. It's about getting the best out of your people. Let them try their best and see what happens, even if it's a different approach than you would use. 3, 5, 6, 7 thinking is a profound way to tackle large, complex problems. It helps you generate quick, meaningful wins and turn them into genuine momentum. Don't overconsume your resources on the wrong efforts. This is essential to strategic execution. If you enjoyed this episode, there are 3 things that I would ask of you. First, please share it with at least one person. Second, hit those rating stars on whatever platform you downloaded this podcast. When you do that, it raises the visibility of what we are talking about to people just like you. Third, follow me on LinkedIn and Meta, especially on Instagram at Tim_Ohai. You'll get even more content that will both challenge and inspire you. Holo mua. Onward and upward.